And it goes a little something like
Ex-Muslims in Ethiopia have existed in the country as long as Islam. A close examination of Ethiopian history reveals who these people were and the significance of their lives. One of those individuals was Fath. He is later known as Abba Enbaqom. Fath was born in Yemen in 1470. His father was a Muslim from the noble class and had 2 wives. His mother was Jewish. Fath started to doubt Islam when he read what the Quran said about Jesus in Surah Al-Imran verse 55. Fath wondered who were the people who followed Jesus and the people who disbelieved in him. He knew it was the Christians who followed Jesus and the Muslims refused to follow him. Distraught by his thoughts, he asked an Islamic judge, a Qadi, for clarification. According to the traditional narrative, upon hearing Fath's questions, the Qadi became angry, threw his crown on the ground and took out his sword. He told Fath if he didn't come from a family of high status, he would have ordered him to be killed for what he said. He warned the young man to not repeat what he said and claimed the Quran has commanded death to those who interpret the book. This response from the Qadi led the young Fath to look further into the religion. During this difficult time, he experienced great distress, and his mind was disturbed with doubts. One of his father's Ethiopian slaves, who was also his wet nurse, expressed sympathy towards him upon seeing him so sad. At the age of 19, Fath left Yemen and sailed to Ethiopia with 2 of his family's Ethiopian slaves. One was named Hassan, and the other was his wet nurse. He did not tell his family. In Ethiopia, Fath felt free to question his faith without pressure from Islamic officials in his family. He asked Ethiopian Christians about their faith and debated with Muslims, sometimes leaving them silent, unable to respond. Like many ex-Muslims, Fath experienced a long period of questioning and doubts before he left Islam. Fath eventually converted to Christianity and was given the name Enbaqom. He studied the religion and many languages under religious leaders. He became an ordained priest at the age of 30. He was later selected for the prominent role as the 11th abbot of the Debre Libanos monastery in northern Ethiopia. As the abbot, he would then be referred to as Abba, or Father, Enbaqom. 3 years later, Enbaqom was accused of a crime, exiled and imprisoned by Lebna Dengel to a Muslim area in northwestern Ethiopia. Enbaqom used this time to preach his Christian beliefs and convert the Muslims to Christianity. Interestingly, Enbaqom is not the first known Muslim who left Islam and converted to Christianity after traveling to Ethiopia. According to Islamic tradition, Ubayd Allah ibn Jash was an early follower of Muhammad and one of the migrants to Ethiopia. Upon arriving in Ethiopia, he eventually left Islam, converted to Christianity, and never returned to Arabia. Enbaqom was in exile when the leader of the Adal Sultanate, Imam Ahmad ibn Ibrahim, invaded the Ethiopian Empire with a large army. The zealous Imam initiated the war with the intention of converting Ethiopia into an Islamic state through Jihad, holy war. Ahmad's vision was in line with the Ottoman empires, which at the time had been launching offensive wars and conquering Europe and Asia for over 200 years. The Ottomans had a plan to conquer Ethiopia, so when Imam Ahmad called on Muslims to fight in his jihad, many Arab leaders happily supplied him with 900 men and highly advanced weapons such as cannons. This aid was instrumental in helping the Imam defeat the Ethiopians during battles. The men raided and pillaged through the country, leaving destruction and death, stealing whatever they could, and enslaving women and children. This is exactly what happens today when Muslims receive the call for jihad and join extremist groups such as Al-Shabaab in Somalia and the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. It is important to highlight that a wide spectrum of Muslim groups existed in Ethiopia during this time. On one end, there were those who were fanatically Orthodox. On the other end, there were those who could be described as semi-pagan. Imam Ahmad mobilized other fanatical Muslims to join his army and fight. This radical group initially grew under the leadership of Abba Enbaqom in 1520. Therefore, Imam Ahmad could be described today as a radical Muslim and jihadist, and was not representative of the sentiments nor goals of all Muslims in Ethiopia at the time, nor today. After over 30 years in exile, A young Emperor Galapagos asked Enbaqom for help with defeating Imam Ahmad. Because Enbaqom was an ex-Muslim, he was able to explain to the Christians the theological impact of Ethiopia turning into an Islamic state. The Christian leader wrote to the Imam in hopes he would end his savage war. He was burning churches and monasteries that were hundreds of years old, looting villages and murdering Christian civilians. Any non-Muslim who encountered Imam Ahmad's army was given 2 or 3 options. 1, they could leave their religion and convert to Islam. 2, they could be killed by beheading. The third option was offered to some people. This option was to pay the jizya, an extortion fee. In Enbaqom's letter to Ahmad, he tells him that he too was a religious zealot of Sharia just like him when he was young. He points out an error the Quran makes about Christianity. The Quran states the Christian Trinity is Jesus, Mary, and God. Enbaqom informs the Imam in Christian texts, Mary is not a part of the Trinity. According to Christian beliefs, she is a human being who gave birth to Jesus through a virgin birth. In Christianity, Jesus is God. The Trinity is a way of describing God as the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. These 3 entities together are components of a singular God. Enbaqom tried to correct the misunderstanding the Ethiopian Muslims had that Christians were idol worshippers who worshipped 3 gods. The Imam allegedly responded to the letter by stating, "I believe in all your books, because I believe the Torah and the Gospel and the books of the prophets which God brought down. From now on I swear by sublime God and by the divorce from my wives not to burn the churches, nor to kill monks and the poor, except the one who resists me. Here we grant you to explain to us the faith of Christians, starting from our Quran as you proposed to us." Enbaqom's response was a second letter that became the Anqasa Amin, or Door of Faith. This work was likely originally written in Arabic and then translated into the ancient Ethiopian language, Ge'ez. The date the Anqasa Amin was completed may have been 1540, when Enbaqom was 70 years old. This book delivers on Ahmad's request and explains Christianity from both Islamic and Christian perspectives. The book criticizes Islam using verses from the Quran and discusses Islamic history. Enbaqom did not have a copy of the Quran with him, so his knowledge was drawn from memory. This is not surprising considering many ex-Muslims can recall Islamic information they learned when they were Muslim years after leaving the faith. Enbaqom explains a contradiction in the Quran. The Quran states Allah sent down the Torah and Gospel, and those who disbelieve what Allah revealed is one of the disbelievers. The Gospel states Jesus is the Word of God, Son of God, and the Father. This is in contradiction with the Quran that states Allah has no son. While Enbaqom does not explicitly state this fact, he does ask the Imam the following question. What do you say now, Imam? Will you accuse the Torah, the Gospel, and the books of the prophets of lying? Behold, your Quran is a testimony to them, which Allah, praise be to him, has sent down. Or will you be able to accuse your Quran of lying, which is a testimony to them? Enbaqom points out another contradiction in the Quran. The book refers to Allah as a spirit when describing Mary's virgin birth. Enbaqom asserts Allah did not say, "We breathed into her the spirit of angels," or the spirit of men. Instead, the Quran says, "We breathed into her our spirit." The implication of this is that Allah is referring to himself as our spirit, which is a reference to the Christian Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. This verse contradicts the Quranic verse referenced previously where the Trinity is described as Mary, Jesus, and God. Enbaqom also points out the Quran called Jesus the Spirit of Allah. This is found in Surah An-Nisa verse 117. Enbaqom describes an error in the Quran. The Quran is wrong about Jesus' name. In Christian texts, he is known as Yahshua. However, in the Quran, he is called Isa. Enbaqom says Muslims changed Jesus' name from Yahshua to Isa. Enbaqom makes another bold statement. He quotes the Quran's description of the night of power, Laylatul Qadr. He suggests this night is the night of Jesus' birth. We have sent him down during the night of power. How do you recognize the night of power? The night of power is worth better than 1,000 months. The angels and the Spirit descend there at the command of their Lord. She is salvation until the rising of the dawn. The Quran is ambiguous in the verse because it does not state what was sent down. Enbaqom suggests the Quran is referring to Jesus and that he was sent down when he was born. Enbaqom connects the Quran's verses to the Gospel of Luke 2:14, where it discusses Jesus' birth. Enbaqom's finding is supported by research from modern scholars over 400 years later. It is not known whether Imam Ahmad read the Anqasa Amin, as there is no recorded response from the leader. However, in the Imam's response to Enbaqom's first letter, he did say he wanted to meet him in person. As an ex-Muslim, Enbaqom knew the punishment for leaving Islam was death, and that meeting the military leader might lead to his execution. For this reason, Enbaqom remained in hiding and did not travel to the Imam. Muslims today may dismiss Enbaqom's critiques based on the common belief among them that the Christian and Jewish texts were corrupted by people and therefore are no longer reliable. The Quran has never been corrupted, so any inconsistencies is because the Quran is right and the other books are wrong. The problem with this claim is that it is baseless. Nowhere in the Quran does it say the Christian or Jews corrupted their texts. In fact, the opposite is true. The Quran states it is a confirmation of the books that came before, which is a reference to the Torah and Gospel. This claim of corruption of Christian and Jewish texts may have originated in the 11th century in Spain because Ibn Hazm is the first person known to popularize it. Enbaqom made a few mistakes. One of those was how he called Fatima and Khadija the daughters of Muhammad. In Islamic tradition, Khadija is known as one of Muhammad's wives, not daughter. Another mistake is that Enbaqom interprets what your right hand possesses in Surah An-Nisa as meaning men can have sex with men and women. This is incorrect, as the verse describes men cannot marry married women except if they are their slaves. In Islam, men can marry slave women who have husbands. These mistakes could be because Enbaqom was incorrectly taught these details, or he misremembered them. When he wrote the Anqasa Amin, he may have been 70 years old, which is 50 years since he left Yemen as a Muslim and had access to the Quran. Aside from the few mistakes Enbaqom made, how reliable is the ex-Muslim Christian's interpretation of Islam and its history? Enbaqom reports Muslim scholars in the 16th century claimed the Quran was an untranslatable text. From his interaction with the Qadi in Yemen, Enbaqom was told anyone who dared to interpret the Quran should be ordered to be killed. Enbaqom claims this was out of fear that they would lose their temporary fame. The implication is that if people were allowed to interpret the Quran, they could come to their own conclusions, one of which could be that Islam is false, and not need to rely on Islamic religious leaders, leading to their decline in popularity. Enbaqom challenged the claim that the Quran could not be translated by translating sections of the Quran he learned in Arabic to Ge'ez. He is the first person to achieve this. This myth that the Quran cannot be translated existed throughout the Muslim world for most of Islamic history. Even in the 20th century, when the English convert to Islam Marmaduke Pickthall wanted to translate the Quran from Arabic to English, he was only granted permission to do so as long as he called it the meaning of the Quran, instead of accurately identifying it as a translation. As an ex-Muslim and native Arabic speaker, Enbaqom was in a unique position to explain Islam to Ethiopians from an outsider's point of view. Without the bias of being a believing Muslim, Enbaqom was able to see the errors in the Quran as they are. Errors. While Enbaqom's Christian bias did contribute to him proselytizing his religion in Anqasa Amin and declaring it superior to Islam, this bias largely did not impact the accuracy of his interpretations. This is an important note. One's religious or irreligious background does not prevent them from being knowledgeable in a religion they don't believe in. Enbaqom had accurately retained a wealth of knowledge about Islam as an ex-Muslim. While the influence of bias should be kept in mind, it would be unfair to outright dismiss his claims on the sole basis of his personal background. Enbaqom's approach to dealing with Islam was unique to that time. In Ethiopia, Islam was viewed as a political system whose jihadi swords needed to be fought against with weapons as well, not challenged with words. However, Enbaqom's comparatively peaceful approach of the pen rather than the sword is the more effective one. An ideology such as Islam is a set of beliefs. It cannot be killed on a battlefield because it is not alive. Ideologies live in people's minds and thus must be deconstructed to dismantle. Enbaqom's approach is relevant for people today who are trying to fight against Islamic extremism. Enbaqom, as an ex-Muslim, was able to distinguish between Islam as a religion and Muslims as people. Through his life and writings, it is clear that he was anti-Islam but not anti-Muslim. He was an example of how people can be sympathetic to the Muslim people while being critical of the ideology that they follow. The Anqasa Amin was a way for Enbaqom to encourage Muslims to question the Islamic tradition. He wanted Muslims to see there was not one interpretation of the Quran. What the Quran said was one, and what Muslim scholars tell Muslims is another interpretation. He believed the Quran was not the work of a god, but from people, Muhammad and his Christian monk companion, Bahira. Through the Anqasa Amin, Enbaqom wanted Christians to view Islam, the new religion that was being enforced onto them during the Jihad, as inferior to Christianity. Before the Anqasa Amin, Christians in Ethiopia had limited knowledge about Islam. Enbaqom became well known within the Christian Ethiopian Empire, and people traveled from far to meet him. He wanted Christians who converted to Islam to return to Christianity, urging that they could still be Christians under Islamic rule. Ultimately, Enbaqom's work did not result in a mass conversion of Muslims to Christianity, nor did he stop Imam Ahmad's killing of Christians and destruction of churches. When he wasn't trying to stop a war, Enbaqom's thirst for knowledge kept him busy. He studied and spoke many languages including Arabic, Ge'ez, Coptic, Greek, Latin, Portuguese, and Armenian. This allowed him to communicate with the Imam and write the Anqasa Amin. The polyglot also helped greatly contribute to Ethiopian literature by translating numerous Christian texts and Arabic literature into Ge'ez. After the war was over, Enbaqom helped with restoring the literature that was ruined by Imam Ahmad's soldiers by copying manuscripts. In 1565, Enbaqom died at the age of 95. The Anqasa Amin became a well-known work in Ethiopia. In the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, Enbaqom is celebrated on the 21st of the month of Miasia. Through Enbaqom's words and actions, he left Ethiopia more hopeful, understanding, and enriched with knowledge. As a young questioning Muslim, he bravely investigated what he was told was the truth in an effort to come to his own conclusions. And he encouraged Muslims to do the same, to read their own texts and not accept Islamic authority figures as the ultimate source of truth. As an ex-Muslim living under the threat of an Islamic conquest, his life was in danger, yet he chose to risk it all and engage with the man who was trying to destroy everything he loved. He translated parts of the Quran into another language, 400 years before it was permitted by Islamic officials anywhere in the world. Enbaqom made well-supported arguments that criticized the Quran in Islamic history, and may be the first documented person to suggest Islam's Laylatul Qadr is a reference to the night of Jesus' birth. Therefore, Enbaqom's legacy as a brave, intelligent, and accomplished ex-Muslim is worthy of recognition not just in Ethiopia, but around the world.